The Florida Panthers were blessed with their nationally televised schedule, but we must ask the question, is there a game that we wish that the Florida Panthers were on the national stage?
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this Friday, September 1st edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on X at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. So like we said at the top of the show, it's September, which means just a few weeks away from the start of training camp. The expected start date will be sometime after September 18th because that will be the last day of the Panthers Prospects Showcase. So definitely be on the lookout for that. And also be on the lookout for our top 30 Florida Panthers of all time, a survey that I will be conducting here. Should be released sometime in the next week as it is in the works for you guys to put your vote, and we're going to dedicate maybe a show or two on the top 30 Florida Panthers of all times. But it is Friday, which means it is a Fairbanks Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Nick Fairbanks is back. Nick, happy September, my friend.
Happy September indeed. You really didn't expect what we got maybe a day or two ago, but you know what? Let's go.
Absolutely. And it's so crazy because now with the start of football season and then the training camp as well, and something I'm excited for this coming weekend is the fantasy football draft between me, David Rodriguez of the FLA Cats Hockey Podcast, Kirby Lupo, and a whole bunch of Panthers content creators. So I'm very looking forward to that this weekend as sports are starting to ramp up. As of course a pennant race with Major League Baseball, as the Marlins are 3 games behind in the NL wild card. Your Cubs are actually in it too, so it's going to be a tight race there. But let's go right into the hockey stuff, my friend. So a few days ago, the Walt Disney Company and Warner Brothers announced their national broadcast schedule for the NHL. And we were expecting more nationally televised games for the Florida Panthers, of course, making the run to the Stanley Cup final. You are always rewarded when making a long playoff run, whether you win or not. For years, ever since 2015, the Tampa Bay Lightning were getting constant nationally televised games despite not winning a cup until the 2020 bubble as well. But with the Florida Panthers, usually 1 or 2 in the last few seasons with ever since the 56 game season, really. But Nick, 7 outside of ESPN Plus and Hulu, 7 of them. Here's the list. At Washington on TNT on November 8th. November 22nd versus the Boston Bruins the day before Thanksgiving, TNT. Versus the Dallas Stars at home on TNT. February 14th at Pittsburgh on TNT. And then the ESPN games that the Florida Panthers will have at the New York Rangers on a Saturday night at 8 p.m. in the Garden, mind you. And then April 6th at Boston on ABC at the TD Garden at 3:30. And then home against the Toronto Maple Leafs on ESPN, their last home game of the season right before the postseason. And the ESPN Plus games are November 14th at San Jose, which I believe that will be the 3rd straight season Panthers at Sharks on ESPN Plus. Frank Petrano had a 2-goal game in one of them, and Sam Reinhart had a shootout goal to carry his momentum into a 30-goal season. And versus Tampa Bay on ESPN Plus versus Nashville on ESPN Plus, both of those will be in March, and then versus the Columbus Blue Jackets at home on ESPN Plus. But man, again, blessed where the Florida Panthers were with this nationally televised schedule. what do you think about the Panthers getting this many games? 12 total, but 7 on regular cable.
We're in the midst of the Matthew Tkachuk aura. He is the main reason probably why they have as many nationally televised games as they do outside of their playoff run. But if he was not as clutch, or if he was not as, he was not the light that, South Florida has or Sunrise has right now, I don't think they get more than 5. You have Barkov, you have Ekblad, you have Bobrovsky. I'm going to put Lundell in there because I think he's going to take the next step. But, you have that centerpiece now, that guy that everybody knows. They either love him or they hate him, or they love to hate him because they wish they were on his team. He was on their team. But, I think this is kind of what we were talking about last season, that he is the draw now. He's the one that Florida can really lean on to bring in more fans to watch the team, more revenue, get more sponsors, things like that. So I think it's wonderful. It's funny that the first game that they're going to nationally televise is actually on my birthday, so maybe I might go up to Washington. So we'll see. But no, it's an amazing thing, and I just hope that the Panthers can actually play up to their standard, just because I know in seasons past it's been mixed bag of results when they play nationally. But I will say this: I do prefer the nationally televised games on TNT, especially. Rather than some other networks that they will be on, just because I think the biases are more level, or they're even.
Yeah, and we were expecting quite a few TNT games as well, based on, even before the announcement, based on how the rotation works on Wednesdays, especially. Usually those are the 3 game nights, or sometimes max 4, with the exception of the day before Thanksgiving, because the NHL doesn't play on Thanksgiving as well. So the Boston one at home on the 22nd was maybe a little bit of a surprise, but then you look at the other Wednesdays, I'm like, okay, that could be a TNT game. This one could be a TNT game as well. So that's actually where if you are doing this much investigative work, then it wouldn't be a surprise for you definitely. But like you said about Matthew Tkachuk, People Magazine being on the NBA on TNT crew before the Heat played a playoff game as well, that just created so much draw. And you think about the impact that this region has based on that alone. It's just an awesome draw for the Florida Panthers here. And I want to ask you this. I'm going to go first on this. Is there a game that you wish got nationally televised? And for me, none of the conference final or Stanley Cup final opponents that the Florida Panthers faced, none of those games against Carolina or the Vegas Golden Knights are going to be nationally televised. I know on the top of my head that one of the games against the Vegas Golden Knights is a 3:00 start. It's actually a Saturday, Saturday, December 23rd, a few days before Christmas. So I guess college football bowl season, along with NFL, now that they're playing on Christmas and all that stuff too. I think that's a big reason why. And then early in the year, actually, they'll be facing up against each other twice in the span of 2 weeks. One of them on January 4th, which is a Thursday. So with the way the schedule works, I'm assuming that's why they are in the midst of that, because of the NFL football postseason and all. And the matchups against Carolina, I'm shocked, especially with the quotes after about the whole "we didn't get swept." They're facing off 3 times. I mean, and the thing is, the 2 matchups against Carolina, one of them is in February, where there's not a lot of activity in sports going on. March Madness isn't going on yet. The PGA Tour is not having their unofficial first major in the Players Championship and all that too. So I'm surprised that Carolina and VGK, none of them against the Florida Panthers are nationally televised. How about you?
You definitely took one of mine, which was the VGK game, just before Christmas. I think that would be perfect. I know the NBA always plays on Christmas Day. The NHL goes on holiday for a couple of days just to kind of give the players some rest. But I think not nationally televising the Stanley Cup rematch does do it some disservice. Maybe they'll have a change of heart. I mean, it is on a Saturday at 3:00. I almost wonder if they didn't do it because people will be out shopping, people will be doing their holiday thing, so they don't know about viewership. But I just think that it would be a top draw, to be honest. And the other one is the first game at home against the Toronto Maple Leafs on October 19th.
Mm-hmm.
Sheldon Keefe just signed an extension. Now, I'm going to go off on a tangent here. So I think it's interesting that he got an extension, yet Kyle Dubas, I'm sorry, is no longer with the team. But I don't expect Toronto to change too much. And I want to get in that we want Florida mode right away. I want that. I don't want to say hatred, but like that arrogance. I want that to be brought to the forefront. And, I want it early in the season. So, and I want to see Toronto leave, FLA Live Arena with a loss early in the season.
Yeah. Thankfully, the very last game of the season on April 16th, maybe that could be a fight for positioning in the Atlantic Division. We won't get into predictions on standings just yet as far as that, but definitely definitely another surprise. But we can't be nitpicky. The Panthers don't have this many nationally televised games in a normal year, so we can't. We definitely is not something that we can complain too much about. If anything, this is a time where we should be all but excited about the Florida Panthers getting this much exposure when it comes to the national broadcast schedule. But in segment number 2, we're going to go over the under 23 rankings, and we're going to discuss whether Anton Lundell and Spencer Knight were too high, too low, or just right. We're going to discuss that more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about FanDuel, and get ready for the NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guarantees. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use, and you can bet everything from the spreads to player props and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with an offer you won't want to miss. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Segment number 2 here on this Friday, September 1st edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast is another edition of Fairbanks Friday here on the show. So, Nick, the Athletic released an article a few days ago talking about the tiers and the rankings of every single player under the age of 23, and the criteria is they must be under 22 on September 1st, 2023. So that is the criteria to be on the U23 rankings. So it's funny because when you look at the list and you think about the tiers, there's only one person in tier number 1.
Who is that?
He is a guy who hasn't even played an NHL game yet. A generational talent, Connor Bedard, first overall pick in the most recent NHL entry draft. Which I still have a lot of mixed feelings when it comes to rankings of guys who haven't played a game yet and have, because right behind him is Jack Hughes, and tier 2 is elite NHL player. But also with this list, it's very Eastern Conference dominant. So the Florida Panthers getting to the Stanley Cup final and still challenging for a top 3 spot in the Eastern Conference, it makes me feel better about how they've continued to compete in this conference, because you have Timmy Stützle in here, Adam Fantilli, who's another person who has never played a game, Matvei Michkov, who's going to take a few years before he comes to the U.S. as well. But let's go all the way to where a Florida Panther ranks in this list. I'm not going to go over the whole list, but Anton Lundell is spotted in tier 5, which is number 21. So again, 170 players, 8 tiers, and Anton Lundell currently in tier 5, which the definition is bubble NHL All-Star and top of the lineup player at number 21. And for me, this feels just right. I can only imagine if the Panthers somehow are eliminated in round 1 and you don't get the Anton Lundell that we got in the final 2 rounds, especially. he is maybe somewhere in the 30s or 40s, because look at the company that he's in. He's in the company with the first overall pick and Yaroslav Slavkovsky, Jake Sanderson, and all. Wyatt Johnson, who was in the race for the Calder Trophy as well. Logan Cooley, who just signed his ELC, now leaving the University of Minnesota for the Arizona Coyotes. And I do believe that Lundell has a really high floor, being the 12th overall pick, Bill Zito's first pick. And Corey Pronman described it as not flashy, something that's that he just does the responsible things correct when it comes to Anton Lundell. And of course, it's you who's on the show, so it's your boy Lundell. So talked about skill grades: skating below average, puck skills below average, hockey sense above average, and compete at high end. So what do you think about Lundell being ranked number 21 in the U23 rankings?
So if I was in a story called the, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, I would have to choose, yes, this does feel just right. I do kind of take a little bit of caution with possibly him being a bubble all-star, because I really don't know if he's going to be able to obtain that. I mean, you have Barkov, you have Tkachuk. So as long as those two are Panthers, I don't see Lundell being an all-star. But if he has a
Agreed.
skill level, if he has a skill level and he actually has a breakout, and he basically shows fans like, hey, you can't leave me off of this team or during the All-Star game, I can see him squeak in. But, I don't agree with the assessment that he has, low puck skills at all. I just think he's somebody who is defense first. He plays a 200-foot game. And honestly, there's been some times where he's been able to control the puck and keep the puck and control the zone. So his skating, he could definitely, probably improve a little bit. I don't think he's the fastest guy either, but definitely something that he can work on. But he's already proven that he's a stable player in the lineup. He's not going to go down anywhere. He's waiting for an extension. Hopefully, I hope it's before the season that they can sign him to a bridge extension.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, you can slot him at 3C for sure. And then depending on the injuries, he did step up during the playoffs and definitely displayed what he brings to the team. So 21 or tier 5, I think is just right for Anton Lundell.
Yeah, and a guy who plays above his size, and even though with his body not fully developed yet, you spoke best, 3C, but has the possibility to go up and down in that top 9, which is something so valuable for this team, especially because you have a good backup plan in Eetu Luostarinen, who can take some draws on the 3C if you need Anton Lundell to go back up. And yeah, like you said, with the depth of the Florida Panthers, and the way the All-Star game works too, which every team has to have a representative there too.
Mm-hmm.
You're likely not going to see the overall national respect for Anton Lundell as well, but it's just something that you have to watch him every single day to really appreciate, guys, because he's not a guy that you watch every single game and a guy who's like extremely noticeable. And just does the little things right, like winning board battles as well, and forechecking for him as well, gaining the zone as well. And Corey Pronman says that projects as the number 1 center, but hey, luckily the Florida Panthers in their future have the possibility of having 2. So, and because Barkov has been here so much longer, it's he's always gonna be in his shadow. I mean, we even kind of say it as that with Baby Barkov too. So
Yep.
it not only is it the national fan base that says it, but it's even us too, or even Jacob and so many different people as well.
Definitely. And, I think that only serves to work for Lundell, just because he'll have his mentor in Barkov to show him the ropes and really kind of provide him with the knowledge and, the preparation that he got from Jaromir Jagr. I mean, Barkov was a different player after playing with him, and I just hope that Barkov can impart that onto Lundell, because if he does, we will have 2 number 1 seeds, and we'll be able to interchange them, whether that's on the power play, the penalty kill, etc. And that would just make things more interesting here in South Florida. One other thing I did want to add is I do see Anton Lundell making the All-Star game if he can pop between 20 and 30 goals before the All-Star game. So he's got to start hitting the net at a higher rate. And if he takes the next step, I believe he's got the shot to do it.
Yeah, definitely not expecting it, but hey,
manifesting? I'm manifesting
how
right
awesome
now.
would that be? for sure, if Anton Lundell does in fact reach that mark, and hey, the Florida Panthers will likely have 2 already. Hey, let's. I know they're not the host city. Toronto will be, so expect some Maple Leafs in that Atlantic Division for 3-on-3 hockey. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we're going to discuss another Florida Panther on this list of U23 players. We're going to discuss that more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Third and final segment here on this Friday, September 1st edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. It's another edition of Fairbanks Friday. And also, Cats fans, if you want to celebrate more of the Florida Panthers, you can attend the Marlins game on September 6th against the LA Dodgers, where it will be Florida Panthers Day at Lone Depot Park. They will be giving away a shirt that says 1993 with both the Panthers and the Marlins logo. Half of it will be in Florida Panthers colors, the other half will be in Marlins colors. And Sam Reinhart will be the one to throw out the first pitch on September 6th's game against the LA Dodgers. Also, go listen to Peter Pratt of Locked On Marlins, as once again, they are in the middle of a pennant race. But Nick, let's go back to this list with the U23 rankings. And the next one is Spencer Knight. 170 players we spoke about. And there's 8 tiers, and tier 8 starts at 85 to the rest. So tier 8 would be middle of the lineup player. Tier 7, which is where Spencer Knight falls into, is bubble, top, and middle of the lineup players. And the way I process this ranking for Spencer Knight comes with a little bit of maybe recency bias based on performance and the elephant in the room, going to the NHL/NHLPA Players Assistance Program. And here's the thing. You just don't forget how to play hockey just because you're taking a mental break. Yes, there's a lot of things in between the ears to help you play right. But again, we've spoken about how this was the time to get right so that you are able to have the movement when you are in the crease as well. So for me, I think it's going to do a lot of good more than bad, in my opinion. But I think people also forget the resume that comes with Spencer, a gold medalist in the World Juniors, and then finishing off the series against the Tampa Bay Lightning in 2021 as well. I don't think that's anywhere near what Spencer Knight's ceiling can be. And let's not forget that sometime in the early part of the year when Bobrovsky was struggling, there was that question: could Spencer Knight take over the number 1 crease even in the beginning of this season? We were talking about it last season as well for a little stretch of time as well. So I think 83. I think for him, I think it's a little low for him. And Corey Pronman does mention the NHL Players Assistance Program and says that he is a hard one to judge. It does say that he was inconsistent as well, and did point out that he has the qualities to be a starting NHL goalie in the NHL, which we're going to see in the next few years, at least at least by 2025. But for Spencer Knight being the number one guy, at least that's the hope for the Panthers. But what do you think of Spencer Knight being ranked 83 and the definition of Tier 7 bubble, top and middle lineup player?
So about Spencer Knight, it's not what you do when you're down. It's how you get up, and I think that's going to be very telling and how he is viewed going forward. He had to take some time off to get things right. Again, we still don't know exactly what went on. We're just gonna speculate about that, but he doesn't have a lot of work or a body of work in the NHL. I mean, he's
Fair
been
enough.
very good, where he was very flashy, and he was the guy that, wow, I mean, he was making some unbelievable saves. And then there were some other games where it's just like, you're looking like Bobrovsky. And unfortunately, it just hasn't panned out. So to me, it may be a little low, but I think it's based on the sample size and the fact that he did have to take a leave, and we don't know where he's at right now. So I think it's going to be telling two things. Number one, where he starts the season, if he's going to be up with the Florida Panthers or if he's going to start with the Checkers, because believe it or not, the best thing for a goalie is to play. And if Bob is going to be number one, which he's expected to be, is it really in Spencer's best interest to ride the pine and just watch? He needs to play. So hopefully he understands that, like last season when he went down to Charlotte and didn't report and he went in the player assistance program, that he needs to play. And this is for him to be better. And I think that will only be, that will be his path back to being the number one and being the guy that the Panthers need him to be.
Yeah, no doubt. And sitting for maybe like 4 or 5 straight starts, somewhere in that ballpark, and still having that question mark over your head. I think that's a scenario that Bill Zito's thought about with behind closed doors and say, okay, we need to know something, because last season I talked about how detrimental to the team it would be if Bobrovsky is the worst of the two goalies in the season. I mean, say what you want about Bobrovsky and then Alex Line having to get the Panthers to the playoffs, but still Bobrovsky was able to hold the fort especially at the end of February / early March, before play went off and injury went off for Bob. But I think it's completely flipped its head this season, because even though Bobrovsky's no move clause is going to become a modified no trade clause this upcoming offseason, it is more, I think there is a lot more pressure on Spencer Knight to perform well, because if he doesn't, that means even if Bobrovsky is average, there isn't an avenue for a trade, because he's going to submit a 16-team no trade list. But with Spencer Knight, if you do like what you see out of him and you see like a 9-10 save percentage, not saying that will be the case, then it gives you that avenue of putting something together as well, as far as some cap relief. Because again, like we spoke about even a month ago, we can't get married to the number that the Panthers will have because of how many open roster spots there will be on this team. So I think it's completely flipped this season from Bob having the pressure to Spencer. But listen, he's gonna get his reps. That's the best thing about it. I can only imagine the call between the Florida Panthers and the NHL to get him in, because there's a lot. He knows that there's a lot on the line as well, and thankfully, according to him, his wellness is a lot better, so that he is in that position to be back in games, at least according to him. So again, none of our business as far as the details of it. But hey, you can only hope that if Bobrovsky does need a rest, that Stolarz can fill in some games while Spencer is still, easing his way back in.
Yeah, I think you said it best. We can't get married to a number, but I think one thing that Florida Panther fans and hockey fans can get married to is the word consistency. I think that's been the biggest issue, is that he hasn't found consistency in his NHL game yet. He came in a couple seasons ago and played his first playoff game against Tampa Bay and was able to, win and actually get Florida, into, I think, back to Tampa, or maybe it was back to Florida. But anyways,
back to Tampa.
Yeah.
For game 6.
So, yep. So he was able to do that, stave off elimination and then put a few games together the next season. But again, still had those games where you're just kind of like, ooh, it's not the best effort. So hoping that he comes in this season with a better mindset, has a mindset of just wanting to be consistent, playing more games and playing within himself and not really worrying too much. I want to see the Spencer Knight that's calm, cool, and collected in net, the way that he came in, because it didn't seem like anything was rattling him. And if the Panthers can get that and more consistent play from him, and Bob, is Bob during the season, then I think Spencer could end up being the number one guy. But again, he's got to prove it, and he's got to prove that he belongs here.
And let's not forget that in the 2 playoff games, especially the home game in Game 5, when the Bally Sports cameras went on Spencer, it felt like that he wasn't even playing a playoff game, and he was just smiling because he was great to be there. And that's how you know that you're just enjoying life. And I hope we see so much more of that. And who knows, maybe in his first official NHL game back, we'll see a little bit. And that's something that we could definitely point out on this program as well. A little bit of the skill grades: hockey sense is above average, and skating is about average for Spencer Knight. Spoke about technique is on above par as well, and high end hockey sense for Spencer Knight. So definitely the tools are there, but it's really all between the ears for Spencer Knight and what's needed to be back to hopefully the status of on track to being the number one goaltender for the Florida Panthers. But Nick, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Training camp is just around the corner, my friend. Tell everybody where they can follow you online.
Appreciate the time again, and hope hockey season comes sooner than we realize. So everybody can follow me on the X at Prudential0, and then also on Threads. Get your thread game on at Beret 1096. So Armando, thank you again, and looking forward to talking with you again next week.
Awesome. See you next week, my friend.
See ya.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And every day is make sure you come back next week. We are going to be discussing, will the Florida Panthers bring any guys in for a PTO? We're going to discuss more about the top 30 Florida Panthers of all time and more preseason divisional crossovers as September is here and hockey is just around the corner. So I'm Armando Velez with Nick Fairbanks, and you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.